This is Dread from Epic Builds. And in today's video topic, we're going to be going over Static Spellblade. So, since the last episode, I had to move to Standard. Why is that? Well, after about 2 days of farming all the way to 300 corruption, and even with the new setup on monoliths where it's easier to get stability and stuff and corruption, I still could not find a prismatic gaze in solo. I found a 1 LP Orions, and that was good enough for me to go back to standard, sadly. So I decided to take that and try to make the build a lot better than what it was in solo. Now, its performance in monoliths, it was okay. Like, monolith grinding was pretty cool. Like, you could surge and then static and hit the whole screen. It felt good to play in monoliths. It's just, I believe the defenses that I had set up were not good enough for 300 corruption. I think you could do better. I think the way it went about defenses were bad, but in terms of offense, monoliths were great. The performance on bosses, otherwise, it was mediocre at best. Like, it was like serviceable damage. You could have better damage than this if you refined things, had better crit and stuff like that. But it was like passable, in my opinion. For how good the clear was, it's passable damage. Obviously, that's partly because, I have to actually dodge things, but I would not suggest this if you really enjoy bossing. I would not suggest this build whatsoever. But it is still fun to play around with all these archetypes. Now, the main problem I have with this build is how actually squishy it is. It's squishy and it's not squishy. It's kind of confusing. So, ward without uniques kind of sucks right now. There's probably a better way of going about this, like the defenses. Now, the ward itself, with the ward gained from mana use, because like we're spamming really high mana statics, it gives us a bunch of ward because of that each time we static. The problem was we weren't able to static enough to actually generate a large amount of ward, and of course we have a decent amount of ward retention, like 400%, and that's without any of the special ward uniques except for Strand of Souls, which I'll talk about later. Now, Opulent Focus, sadly, is not enough to carry ward all by itself. It is a cool concept to have a catalyst that gives you an insane amount of ward and stuff, but it is not enough to save a build. It is not enough to become tanky enough. There are better options. Spellblade can just be the class that always uses Bastion and nothing else, and that will be the case until catalysts are eventually looked at again and then buffed again. So sad day for the Opulent Catalyst. I think Opulent Focus. I think it has its place, but not currently. Now, Static is very close to being good overall. It is very, very close. Now, the quality of life on it, when you get the range nodes and all the extra targeting nodes, it's really, really nice. The problem is you have to invest a very large, significant amount of your resources into generating static charges, and static, sadly, is only really good when you get to like 175, 200 charges. Now, the problem is you'll get up to 175 or 200 charges, but you're not getting there enough on a single target situation. Even with Prismatic Gaze, even with all this setup, it is really hard to get there. I think there is a way to make it a lot better. Amaranthi was actually showcasing a version where you use Surge and you use it to proc Lightning Blast, but that version sucks up a lot of mana and it feels clunky to play, at least in my opinion. So I decided not to try that version, at least now. I think there is a way to make this work, but I will have to look at it at a different date because I've played static for like the past week now, and I'm getting so tired of it. Not because it's like bad by any means, but I'm just getting tired of playing Spellblade in general because I think Spellblade is still underperforming. Now, the Surge node that's bypassing the cooldown on mana and cooldown for static, I think it is bugged. Amaranthi, both and I, we believe that that should not be how it functions. It makes the skill feel really good to play, but sadly, I don't think it should be bypassing the mana cost at least, and it bypassing the mana cost is actually worse for us because it makes it so that we don't actually proc our prismatic gaze whenever we use it to proc static. So it's kind of iffy on how good that actually is, because you actually want to be spending the mana in this case thanks to prismatic gaze, and all the mana is spent gained as ward. But of course, that I'll re-look into that and probably make a bug report and ask the devs to see if that was intended or not. Now, I'm going to try a different version with Battle Mage's Endeavor. I think that that's the way to go at this point to make it feel good enough to yeet the Opulent Focus and go for a two-hander. That might be the way to go. I'll have to try it, of course, but that should be the way to go. And that's pretty much it for the build today. If you want to see me streaming, I would suggest following down below in the description, twitch.tv/epicbuilds_YouTube. And you can also, of course, like the video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy the content. With all that being said, let's get into the game, shall we? All right, here we are in game with the build. Of course, the name is Fraudulent Charges. I thought that was pretty funny. But overall, I leveled this in solo, like I showed you in the other video, and then I went to standard, and it's okay. It's okay. So for the skill rotation, we just mana strike something and we surge it. Our prismatic shards will go crit it and give us a bunch of prismatic charges. We'll go to full and we'll crit them. I could only ever get to like 200k crits at 175 charges. That might be because of just how I have it set up. I do have a lack of increased damage, but that's mainly because, gearing is very hard on Spellblade because of how many things you need, especially if you're trying to play a ward focused Spellblade. There's not really that many options, especially if you don't want to go too deep into of course, Frostbite Shackles and stuff like that. So the rotation is pretty simple. You just mana strike, use your static. It's not that hard. Now, for the skills, static here, I really, really liked this setup. In the end, I like how it feels. The problem is it's just the damage is a little bit lower than I would like. Now, what we do is we take 2 points into reverberation for charges when we get hit. It's really nice if you get all the points into this, because then you get like 6 charges when you get hit, and it allows you to spam static on a pack a few times per second, and that gives you a bunch of ward thanks to things hitting you. I think there is a way of going about that later on, which I plan on. So I plan on using this node more in the future. Then 2 points into Insulation. This actually is really strong because it gives you ward gained per charge. Eventually, I wish I could have 4 points into this and I would gain like 175 ward per time on top of all the mana gained as ward. You can actually get a lot of ward thanks to that. But sadly, I don't have enough points because I don't have a +2 to static, and static is very point intensive. We have 1 point into Kickstart here. Cooldown reset at maximum charges. This is very important for any static setup. Otherwise, the cooldown takes too long. Otherwise, you're waiting too long to deal damage. Dealing damage every 6 seconds sucks absolute ass. So yeah. Then I eventually went 3 points to Forked Lightning. Static is really weird because it only hits like 5 enemies. You want to be hitting way more than just 5 enemies. So this is a good way of getting there. Eventually, I went 3 points into this. 2 points travel into Empower. This is useless. It's just travel to Power Surge so that we get a bunch of flat lightning damage per charge, but it costs a bunch of mana. Now, that's kind of okay with our setup because we are utilizing a Rune Dagger and stuff, so we want all this flat so that we can deal damage. This makes it so whenever we invest into charges for static, we get a bunch of flat damage to scale our static from, which normally you would not get much because of being a sorcerer. Then 3 points into Electrify. The base crit is amazing. Always want the base crit. 1 point into Lightning Cleave. This makes it so we have additional enemies hit per charge. So this is 3 extra hits, bringing us to 5 plus 5, so it's 10 targets. That's almost enough to blow up most packs in the Monolith, but it can leave you a little bit left to be desired, sadly, and there's no way of getting more hits other than these 2 nodes. Then this node, Surge. This is the node the whole build is built around. Gaining charges when you surge is very important because it allows you to surge every 3 seconds instead of 6 seconds, which increases your single target significantly. This is the node the whole build is built around with the prismatic gaze and all the setup. Sadly, it just wasn't enough for this specific setup on Spellblade. Then, of course, we have 3 points into overcharge. Eventually, you want 4 points so we can get up to 200 charges. So you have 800% more damage. Right now, we're at like 600% more damage. 700 actually, 700% more damage. And of course, 175 flat. We want as much as possible. And here, of course, we don't have that. Then 1 point into reach. I found this is enough to have enough AoE because the problem with static is it hits nearby enemies. It does not have that good of a range, but if you go into 1 point to here, it instantly fixes the clear because you go from 175 charges like divided by 4. That's kind of like I think like 40-ish percentage increased range, which is enough to make it hit pretty much close to the entire screen. I found a 1 pointer in this is enough in most situations. Then 1 point of momentum. Having haste on a mage feels really good because there's not that many sources of haste on mage, so just having it for free is nice. And that's pretty much it for static. I was trying to utilize fulminating blows. Fulminating blows feels really good, but sadly it has a 1 second cooldown, and that's a no-no for us. Sadly, it's almost good enough, but not good enough to like take 4 points travel into reverberation into fulminating blows. Otherwise, I would take it. Then for Mana Strike here, Mana Strike, we're trying to proc as many crits as humanly possible for our node and Surge here. So we have Lightning from Mana Storm. This is a hit, so that's a crit on top of Mana Strike critting. We also have Spark Charges, which is another hit. So each time we hit with Mana Strike and we crit 3 times, that's 3 times per hit, and we have a decent amount of attack speed, which helps us a lot. Then we have a lot into mana generation because we're self-casting static to actually give us the mana gained as ward. So we're actually needing to like sustain our mana since we're no longer free casting it with static, which was the way to make it so we actually have ward. Then 5 points to critical mana, 3 points in the mana drain for as much mana as possible. Then 1 point to critical reverberation so that we actually can crit with our Mana Strike, because since it doesn't count as a spell, it doesn't get all the spell critical strike chance that we have from all the tree and stuff. So we definitely want that specifically. Now, Flame Ward, stereotypical Flame Ward setup, not really, can't really go wrong here. Just having extra ward, it's really good since we are a ward build. It helps a lot to have this much ward generation. It's our main source of ward generation, sadly, because Spellblade doesn't have that many options, especially if you're not playing something like Shatter Strike. Then, of course, Enchant Weapon here. Enchant Weapon, we just mainly want the attack speed because it makes it so as we crit faster. And of course, we like zap as well because we can zap a bunch of times per second, which will add more crits to Surge and help us reach the breakpoints that we need to. Then Surge itself, Surge right now, there's one node Discharge. This might be bugged. It bypasses the cooldown and the mana on Surge. We don't know if that's bugged or not. Sadly, we can't really tell. And it's not really worth using, sadly, if it's bugged, so I can't use it. Then 5 points into Storm Mages for ward gain, 4 points into Shielding Flex for even more ward. We want as much ward gain as humanly possible, so this helps a lot. 1 point travel to Shocking Blows, 2 point into Conduit, then 5 points in Static Buildup. This is really nice. This is just a flat amount each time, so this is really good. Too bad you can't get Static down enough in terms of cooldown to make this feel good enough. If we could get Static down to like 1 second cooldown or something like that, this would actually be a legitimate way of pumping up our static, but sadly that is not the case currently. Then 3 points into Capacitator. This makes it so that whenever we move into a pack with static, we actually hit the whole pack and gain a bunch of static charges to just pop instantly right after static, which feels really good. That's pretty much it for Surge. Now, you can run the Lightning Blast stuff. There is a way I want to play with the Lightning Blast stuff later on, but that will be a different build. And that's pretty much it for the skill tree here. Now for the passives here, we take 8 points Arcanist. We want as much intelligence as possible because of Prodigy at the top of Spellblade, which gives us a bunch of ward gain per second. Then 2 points Travel to Scholar, 5 points to Mage Flurry for increased attack speed. Now, Preparation works on static, and I should have been using it. I think I should be using it currently. I'm not entirely sure. I think I should be using it. Sadly, this counts Flame Ward, which is a little annoying that it counts Flame Ward for preparation. I wish it didn't, I don't believe. I wish it was the case that it didn't, but you know what? It does. It's a little awkward, but it's really good on single target if you're not spamming Flame Ward. Then 5 points to Mage Forward for the attack speed, of course. 5 points to Knowledge of Destruction for the base crit. We could go into the ward retention here, but having more crit is better. But yeah, you could definitely try to go for the ward retention here. Then 8 points into Calculated Destruction. Spell crit's really strong for spell crit's really strong for us. Then 8 points into Mana Shell. I was trying to invest into armor so that we get a decent amount of armor, which would make our ward feel better. But sadly, it was just not good enough. So I don't think these points are really worth it. 3 points travel into Wisdom. 1 point into Sarunamancer for travel, then 5 points into Rift Bolt. This makes it so that we can sustain our HP, because if we don't have that node, it makes it so that we actually lose all of our HP and we die, which is really annoying. Like in Monoliths, like you lose your HP and it's really hard to get back HP unless if you pot, which is okay. Then for Spellblade, 8 points to the Arcane Warden, a lot of ward gain. 7 points to Elemental Strikes, gives us enough shock chance to reach shock cap. 5 points to Warden's Echo. Warden's Echo is really good. It's this little circle around us that keeps proccing. Now that can crit and cause more crits for Mana Strike, which feels really good. So this is actually really good for this build specifically. Then 5 points in Arcane Shielding, because we want the ward gain per second per Arcane Shield. Then 5 points of Shattered Aegis. I was trying to go, like I said, for the armor, since we can't really run Throne of Ambition. This increased armor helps a lot, and I have increased armor on the chest as well. But sadly, armor scaling kind of sucks right now, and you can't get enough armor on a Spellblade for it to matter, because it doesn't have access to things like Scissors of Hope, which would actually fix this build entirely. Then 5 points into Essence Duel. You want as much attack speed as possible. 5 points into Burden of Knowledge. This flat damage is really good for us because you don't really care about cast speed. The flat damage is really good. Then 10 points into Mental Fortitude for the intelligence and ward per second. 5 points into Prodigy. So we get even more ward per second. We want as much as possible. Then 8 points in Outrun Outlast so that we can get the ward retention and the cooldown recovery speed for Surge. Brings it all the way down to 3 seconds from 4 and makes it feel a lot better. That's pretty much it for the passives. Now for the gearing here, Prismatic Gaze, of course, we were trying to utilize that to actually crit enough. It didn't end up being good enough, but I think this might be usable in a different version of this build, which I plan on playing. Then Oracle Amulet with Spell Crit, Crit Multi, Resistance, Frailty. It's actually a really good amulet. I'm kind of proud I made this. We like the damage over time taken less because Ward sucks against damage over time. So this is actually a really good amulet, and I'm really proud of it. Then for the weapon, we have a dagger here, Rune Dagger. Rune Daggers are best in slot because we can get attack speed, crit multi, and base crit all on the same thing, while also getting adaptive damage. So Rune Daggers are OP. It's really hard to get a really good Rune Dagger on anything other than Rogue, because Rogues are the only class that has like daggers as a kind of like a bonus drop rate. So getting a really good Rune Dagger is really hard. So be on the lookout for these. Arcanist robes here. We want, actually, there's a different base. There's one base that gives you mana gained, a mana spent gained as a ward. We want that base, not this base. Of course, intelligence is really strong. Mana gained as ward is really strong. Armor, and then of course for the last suffix, it could have been armor. Then the lightning crit multi is very strong as well. Like I said, this build kind of failed, so I wouldn't really go with this setup specifically. Then Opulent Focus, I made a really good Opulent Focus, and it failed. It disappointed me. Normally you would think that if you went like this kind of setup, use the Opulent Focus and then put offensive modifiers on it, it would be a good balance between dual wielding, where you have a lot of offense, and of course using a shield like a Bastion. Turns out, being a jack of all trades and not being good at everything, like being good at everything and not being really good at specific things, sucks, especially in an ARPG. So Opulent Focus is getting the can. I went for silver rings because movement speed feels really good. You can go for different kinds of rings, probably copper rings for more crit. I just went spell damage, intelligence, spell damage, intelligence. I'm missing a lot of intelligence because my gear is bad, but let me tell you, the intelligence would not save this build whatsoever. I was trying to use Strain of Souls because mana gain spent his ward. As you can tell, when I use my static here, I get a fuck ton of ward. The problem is we can't proc static enough to actually get enough ward. If we were able to proc static, let's say every second, Strand of Souls and all the setup mana gain this ward would be absolutely insane, but you'd require to play a different version where you proc static constantly, which this is not the version for that. So I plan on playing a different one. Then for the gloves, intelligence, crit, could have been attack speed. Attack speed would have felt good. Armor as well. Like I said, I was trying to go armor because I didn't want to go HP because I wanted to prove that ward would work with opulent focus, which of course I was wrong. So you guys gonna laugh at me now. And of course, grieve like boots. You want as much armor as possible. Armor, crit avoid, movement speed, intelligence. Like I said, didn't work out. Pretty good pair of boots though for like a ward build. This is actually a really good pair of boots for like a ward build if you're utilizing what is it called? Frostbite shackles. And of course for the relic, the warding scrolls actually are best relic because the mana gained as ward is really strong, but of course, like I said, just doesn't really matter in the end because the ward feels terrible because opulent focus is terrible. And of course, you want crit, crit multi, level static, resistance, resistance. I never got a really good plus to static relic. It was kind of sad, but I think I could do better if I actually got a plus to static relic. Now for the idols, you want static charges gained per second. They are the best idols. Now if you're playing like the Amaranthi version where you have to click like 5 buttons to do damage, static charge idols are, spark charge idols are better, but it's a lot of min-maxing to do. I really like the static charges because they really help. Like when I'm just like walking around and stuff, I still gain static charges, which helps a lot. I really do think that there's a version of static to play. It's just not this version. And of course, crit idols, resistance idols, and more crit. One of the biggest problems with this build versus like Sorcerer is because we have no crit, like at all. Like Spellblade is crit anemic. Most of our crit comes from Sorcerer and stuff. So it's like that is like one of the biggest problems with Sorcerer is it's anemic in terms of crit, which means we have to go to large lengths to get a bunch of crit elsewhere, which kind of ruins the build overall. So going crit on a Spellblade just feels god awful. And that's pretty much it for the guide today. Like I said, I really do think that there is a static build out there. It's just not this one. All that being said, thank you all for watching. Have a wonderful rest, stay wherever you're at, and bye.